am pleased to have with us Laura Murray. She is an amazing author. And the nice part is it was just by, I call it serendipity, right? Our paths crossed and we were able to strike up a friendship. I consider her a good friend now. So, and if you are familiar with her, she writes several books, picture books, and the new early reader graphic novels. And so we're here tonight to talk about her work. So, Laura, I want to start by again saying thank you so much for taking your time to be here tonight. I do greatly appreciate it. My students love your stories. In fact, your books are on hold because I read it aloud, and you know how once you read one book aloud, then all your kids want those books. But can you talk to us how you began your writing career?
I used to be a teacher, and when I was in college, I remember taking a course on children's literature. And I think it was the first time that I thought of, although having been a reader most of my life, it was the first time I ever thought of, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to not only share books, reading books and sharing books with my students, but it would be so cool to write one day. And so I think that's where the idea came from. And it remained kind of a someday dream for a very long time while I taught and had children of my own. And then when I stopped teaching for a little while to take care of my own kiddos, that's when I started thinking, you know what, I need a creative outlet, and I think I'm going to start pursuing this, and started to kind of dive in to learn about how to write for children. Joined different organizations, got a critique group, came up with an idea that was actually based on something that we used to do in kindergarten, the school gingerbread man hunt. We did this at the very beginning of the year, but I think a lot of schools also do this around a fairy tale unit, or sometimes around, since it's about gingerbread, sometimes around the holidays as well. So that's where I kind of started with an idea and with wanting to just express creativity and my imagination.
So, how do you go about creating your stories? I mean, how do you start with an idea and evolve it into this picture book?
Well, the idea came from, like I mentioned, a gingerbread man unit that we used to do in school. We spent the whole first week comparing and contrasting different gingerbread man stories, and we did it around the curriculum. So we did art and music and science and language arts with gingerbread. And at the end of the week, we used our math and measurement to make our own gingerbread man. And I taught kindergarten, and when we would go out to recess, we would come back and he would be missing. So then we would go on a hunt for him through the school. And this was literally my students' favorite unit throughout it was what they remembered the most at the end of the year. And they would go on to older grades. Like I would have sixth graders coming back to me who I taught in kindergarten saying, Mrs. Murray, has the gingerbread man escaped yet? And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe these sixth graders remember that we did something that we did in kindergarten. And that's where the idea came from my students' love of doing that. And we actually had a purpose in doing that unit. And some of it was to initiate or kind of help the kindergarten students learn the new school and the important places and the important people that they would be interacting with. But they had so much fun doing it. I thought, you know what? I have not seen, there's so many gingerbread man stories out there. I haven't seen one that mirrors the fun that we have. So when I started thinking down a creative path, I kind of thought, so there are millions of gingerbread man stories out there. How do I make this one fresh? Maybe not millions, maybe more like, less than 100, but there are lots of them. And so then I started thinking, this is a traditional character. Let's see how we can twist it up and make it a fresh idea. So that's kind of what I did. I asked, what if, what if, what if, what if? If you ever had an author visit your school, you know, lots of authors, many of them ask that what if question and encourage students to ask that what if question. So what if he wasn't running away from the old man and the old woman who were, who made him? What if he was actually in a school setting? And what if he was actually lost and running to his class rather than running away from them? What if he didn't run? As a teacher, I'm always trying to incorporate threads into the books that teachers and educators and librarians can use to connect with the books with their students. So I'm like, well, what about, gross motor skills? Maybe he can skip and hop and jump and spin and then I love rhyme as well. So the books are written in rhyme. And as a teacher, I know that rhyming helps students predict words as well. So it has this a nice literary connection, but it's also just fun to read. It is a challenge to write, but it is a lot of fun. So the books incorporate kind of all of those what if elements to change up the traditional story and make it fresh. So that's part of my process is how can I make my book, my stories fresh, especially if I'm using a traditional character. And then the next step is to kind of ask that what if question and then go, I start making lists. So I make lists of like word banks. And I know that many teachers teach, word banks or not necessarily teach from them, but use them in their classroom. So word banks are how I create stories. I start thinking about all the words that surround maybe gingerbread or maybe the holidays. And then I start using wordplay and rhyming words, and I make lists of all of these things. And that is the basis of where I get not only story ideas, but the actual writing that goes into them. Long answer.
I do, but that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So I always ask this question, you know what I mean? So how long does it take you to write like one picture book from just like a typical time, just from start until like it's on the shelf at like your favorite bookstore?
Yep. Well, I know that answer is different for almost all authors. I've heard some authors say they can write a picture book in a day, and then other authors are like, "Yeah, this has taken me years." So, for example, the first book, The Gingerbread Man Loose in the School, which was my first book, it's this little guy. If you have not seen that, that's the first one. Um, Took me 2 years to write, and that's probably a little long for a picture book, but there were a lot of things going into that. I was learning how to write. I was joining organizations that were helping me learn the children's literature business side of things, critique groups that were giving me feedback on my story. And then I think maybe the two of the most challenging parts. One, I had very little children at the time, so I could only devote maybe a couple of hours to writing it a week. And the second part is that I decided to write it in rhyme, which you do not need to write in rhyme, but I loved that. I loved the wordplay and the challenge of it. And that took me longer to put a story and with a good story arc. And not just using rhyme in service, the rhyme has to be in service of the story, not just because it's fun. Otherwise, it just kind of comes off as not well written. So it took me a long time to do that first one. Now the second ones were maybe 3 to 6 months in writing. But the process of writing that is like when you first are writing, then you have to submit it to all the publishing companies, and that can be several years of rejection and, and persistence. That took me about a year before I found Penguin Random House, G.P. Putnam's Sons, who agreed to publish this. That made me very excited. But then they searched for the illustrator because I am not the illustrator and I don't do illustrations. And that can take a couple of months to a year. And then the illustrator gets at least a year. So it was about 5 to 6 years for the first book to actually hit the bookstores from the time I started writing it to the time it actually was published. Now, the other ones, because they're in a series and you're already dealing with an established character, take probably 3 to 6 months to write, and then the illustration and publishing process is another at least 2 to 3 years before
Oh,
you see it in
wow.
the book. And that's picture books. Now, novels, chapter books that don't involve pictures usually are about a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You wrote a picture book with the gingerbread man, and then you had several that followed that series.
Mhm.
Then you made a transition to what we're calling early reader graphic novels. Can you explain that process, how that transition worked?
Sure. Well, there are 5 in the picture book series, and those are all based on my students' favorite units, like the fire station and visiting community helpers and the zoo and having a messy leprechaun in our room. And then the early reader or emergent reader, either one, graphic novels, were kind of it was something that my editor and I talked about. And since Mike Lowry, who is the illustrator, does the illustrations in this is the picture book, and the illustrations are done in like comic panels, kind of graphic novel panels already. And he said he did that Says he did that because the gingerbread man is constantly moving. There's so much action that he could not do traditional spreads. So a traditional spread in a picture book often will involve just one picture on one page and one picture on another page, or one spread over both pages. And he was like, I can't do it because I'm missing a lot of the gingerbread man's action. So he was the one who came up with the graphic novel comic panel format to make sure that all of the action that was in the text was relayed in the pictures. So my editor was saying, you know what? Since he is already doing that format, that carries over very nicely into kind of a new genre that's emerging called early reader graphic novels. So traditionally, the graphic novel started in kind of a middle grade, or when, everybody became aware of it mainstream in the middle, it's thought of as a middle grade. And now it's transitioning down earlier because it's such a highly interactive, highly visual, high interest format. And my editor was saying, what about taking this character that is already familiar to children from being read to with parents and educators with the picture books into a format where they are reading themselves. So in beginning independent reading. And so that would be the emergent reader graphic novel. Because the illustrations already kind of go that direction. So we just talked about that. And then when I was writing those, the difference is that it goes from maybe a plot with a subplot to just a very simple plot. So it's one plot, simplified language, so that it's not necessarily leveled or completely decodable, but much of it is. There might be a few sight words and challenging words in there that hopefully then are helped out by the art. Because in graphic novels, the art and the text play equally important roles. Matter of fact, the art in panels and graphic novels sometimes will tell the story where the text is not, which is a lot of fun. So you read the art panels just as much as you read the text. So that's where that idea came from, and it kind of just it was a great carryover from picture books, and then taking that character into a genre that kids could start to read themselves.
And so I know that you do many author visits. And so one of the questions that I have, and you can share from an author's perspective,
Mhm.
what suggestions do you have for reading graphic novels to students or sharing graphic novels with
Yeah.
students?
So reading aloud a graphic novel is a different experience than reading a picture book per se. And I'm learning that too as I do school visits. And during school visits, the librarians can, or the hosts can choose which book for which presentation and what grade level that they would like featured as an interactive read aloud. And as I read the graphic novels aloud, if one of those is chosen for a single presentation, what I do and what then I think, folks who are helping students learn, especially young readers, learn how to read graphic novels. I kind of I will start, but I will preface before we even read the book, this is how we're going to read this book. And some of it may seem common sense to those of us who are older readers, but for beginning readers, when you have not only text but art to kind of read. We talk about how graphic novels are read, left to right and top to bottom, so that when you here, maybe I've got one here that we can look at. And so we kind of go over these before the actual presentation. So this is a page from the Gingerbread Man class pet on the loose. And so we talk about how each of these boxes is called a panel, and we read from top to bottom. And if there are more panels on a page, then we read left to right and top to bottom. And then we also talk about how speech bubbles, when characters when the books talk, their speech is in a speech bubble, and the little tag here at the bottom points to the character that's talking. So those are some very basic things that we may, as adults, kind of know, but emergent readers don't necessarily know, and it can be confusing as to how to start with a early reader graphic novel. Um, and then this is a page that I always show the kids as an example of how to read the art. So the text here starts here, and it says, I jumped to a table. Aha, it's a clue. She stepped on this pad. Now her paw prints are blue. But up here are two panels that don't really have any text. but they actually show what's happening. So this is a good example of reading the art. So for readers to read this, they're going to understand that he doesn't just jump to the table, but that he's using a pencil as a pole vault. And you have to read the art to understand exactly what's happening, not just the text. So those are some of the ways that we talk about, how to read a graphic novel or an early reader graphic novel.
What role do these early reader graphic novels play in developing literacy?
I regard early reader graphic novels as a bridge, and they are really a bridge between picture books and then chapter books and then middle grade books. And they can be bridges for regular textbooks or they can be bridges for graphic novels as well. And they have a very strong connection to literacy. Emergent reader graphic novels are high interest because they're highly visual. So the visual art panels support the text and support like, just encouraging readers. I don't know how many librarians I visited this year for school visits who were talking about young children, their youngest readers, whether they be K through third or, wherever they are in their reading level, immediately going to the graphic novel section, wanting graphic novels. And they weren't necessarily the right, especially the middle grade, weren't the right fit for readability or their age level. And so the new emergent reader ones really are serving as a bridge between the picture book and the middle grade graphic novels. And besides the highly, like high interest visual storytelling that kind of creates motivation for kids, who are wanting to read those, they also have they have simple formatting, smaller amounts of panels so that they're easily readable. And the text, when I was writing mine, the text and the content are geared towards developing readers. So they're helping with like word recognition and context clues and comprehension. So those are some of the reasons that I think these are great. They're still great tools in the toolbox because kids are interested in them already. And I feel like in general, the society is moving towards very visual things. So if you can provide the visual high interest along with the text, they just serve as a wonderful bridge between picture books and the later genres. Well, one of the other things I was going to say too, there were four more points, is that within the emergent reader graphic novels, there are different levels and types of emergent reader graphic novels too. So there are like decodable readers that are purely like leveled ones that have very specific requirements and vocabulary. Then they have like beginning readers. They have developing readers and then early chapter books. So all of those are kind of, you will see within the emergent reader graphic novel section, all of those different types of ERGNs is what we call them, early reader graphic novels.
What's your next project?
Well, there are two more in this series. So there are four of the early reader graphic novels. There's another one coming out in June called New Friend on the Loose, which I'm very excited about. One of my favorite topics about who the new friend is. Yeah, when I do school visits, it's a lot of fun to show sneak peeks of that to the students and have them predict, according to context clues of what's on the cover and on the back cover about who that new friend might be, because he in the class, the gingerbread man in the class, are making things out of shapes, new creations out of shapes. So it's really fun to hear their predictions, and then I kind of tell them, okay, I hope you get a chance to look at this book in June and see if your prediction was correct. But also, it's a great way to encourage them to like, okay, this was your story. If you were writing a story about this, who would your new friend be? So we have a lot of discussion about that too. There's a Trick-or-Treaters on the Loose, which will be a Halloween themed one, which will be fun, coming out next year, along with a sixth early reader graphic novel yet that is being written as we speak. So
Oh,
that's exciting. So that's the Gingerbread Man series. I am also working on and probably a chapter book series about a dog and his like lovey. You know how kids have, how dogs have favorite stuffed animals, or so that's being written right now. And then also like a spooky middle grade that I am co-authoring with another writer colleague of mine. So those are in process.
Oh, well, you're busy. You are very busy. Because you do author visits, what are some hints or helpful advice you can give me as I plan an author visit?
Well, I have been do I being a former teacher is really something that has been helpful to me in doing author visits. I've been doing them for 13 years now since the very first book came out. And I love to do them because it reconnects me with the classroom. I don't teach right now. I stopped teaching to take care of my own kiddos, and then I kind of transitioned to children's writing. But it is my connection to my love and respect for both librarians, educators, schools, and students. And my whole goal when I go out to do school visits is to not only, celebrate reading and writing and make it exciting, but my goal is to make sure that kids understand that they can do the same thing. That yes, they will have to read and write for school, but also it can be fun, but to really tap into their creativity, and let them know some tips and tricks and just about writing, whether they want to be an author, but also, using your imagination and creativity is can be used for so many things. They're going to grow up to be our future. They're going to be our future inventors, our future engineers, our, future doctors. They may create the new latest tech and then, the new medicines, and it takes creativity and imagination to do that. So my goal is to celebrate reading and writing, give them tips and tricks, but also to inspire. And so I hope that with when librarians are looking, it's like choosing an author that that obviously that does school visits, and you can check on their website, and there are many ways to find if they do it and see how many they've done and what their goals are, when they come to your school. Also, it's great to choose an author for the audience as well. So if you want a K through 3 audience, then yeah, the picture books, are great, or early reader graphic novels. If you have a 5th grade audience, then maybe middle grade, books are better for that. Although I do speak to like 4th and 5th graders too, very much more about like writing techniques and things like that too, or pulling threads from my books that are science STEM or graphic novel oriented. So looking into the right author, and then once you kind of hone in on one and contact them, um, just some of the best visits I've had have been ones where schools are celebrating reading and writing, and they value that, and you can see that with their students because the students are excited to have you as an author there. And it's not just you as a famous person, although I don't regard myself as a famous person. Kids kind of are asking me that and stuff, but it's more about books and reading, and that they're excited about the connection between books and reading and them, not just the author. Um, like scheduling and communication is important with the author. The author should have a page, or illustrator should have a page on their website, or at least a page that they can send you that kind of that tells you what equipment they may need. And let's see. And I saw the other thing that has been interesting. I know it's been very difficult lately, scheduling sometimes when teachers are present, because in many states, instruction time cannot be taken away from certain subjects. And being a former teacher, I completely understand this scheduling. The organization of an author visit it's for both parties, it can be a lot. Um, but if teachers can be present during the presentations, that's just awesome, because an author will often be talking about, their research. They'll be talking about persistence and revision and rough drafts and all of these things that then if teachers don't hear that, if they're not present to hear that during the presentation, then it's almost like a missed opportunity to be able to reinforce that or use the author as a third party reinforcement of the things that they're already trying to teach in the classroom. Um, so that's all, and I know it's not always possible, but it is awesome if teachers can be present to hear what the author and illustrator are saying too, just because it basically what the author and illustrator are saying is reinforcing what the teacher is already trying to teach usually, and that's super helpful. I have a whole on my website, I have a whole like tab on author presentations, and it has as much information as I can possibly put on there about it because the more that's communicated, the easier it is for both parties too. So, and there might be, I'm not sure if I've covered everything. There's so many little elements that go into it, but the value I think around an author or illustrator visit is just the excitement of like students leaving and telling me all of their ideas about what they're going to go home and write about. Um, it's just, it's kind of awe-inspiring. And then also, I don't know, I just love doing them. It's a lot of fun.
To actually see someone who is an author and the book that they've read and they've enjoyed is actually taking the time to come visit them and then share their love in the process of writing too, I think is so powerful.
Yeah, just sharing behind the little and just giving them ideas about how to give idea. Getting ideas can sometimes seem so hard, but it's actually not as difficult as you think it is. And giving like tips and tricks on how to gather ideas and how to write them down or how to draw them. And like some like the process of not only the writing and how a book comes out, but then the connection with how they can do the same thing is my whole goal. So that's awesome.
I will say, hopefully, you've seen the MASL special edition, MASL message special edition that came out today. In it, it features Laura's message to school librarians, how grateful she is. And I do appreciate you taking the time to do that. That was a very wonderful video.
Oh my gosh, I am grateful. Without librarians are awesome, awesome folks. Without you, the the books would not be getting to the students. You guys put books into the hearts and hands of kids every single day. And as someone who is a kid who had a librarian like that in elementary school who made a real difference, it means a great deal. So yeah, you guys are backbones of schools.
Well, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for taking your time tonight. You are absolutely amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.